So 93 unmarked graves announced today by the English River First Nation, Sarah, and that is in fact an increase in the numbers that were thought to have been there and likely, unfortunately, more to come.
Yeah, Andrew, so this is a search that has been going on now using ground penetrating radar for 2 years, since August 2021. And they put out a press release a few weeks ago indicating that the ground penetrating radar had identified 83 unmarked graves, both of children and a number of infants. The day after that press release went out, the ground penetrating radar experts moved in and placed flags, we're told, in the various sites. And in fact, the number was higher than they had initially thought, and it was 93, 79 young children and 14 in the size of infants. The area of primary search being the old cemetery grounds, which were used only by the residential school up until the early 80s, where there are actual marked graves, some marked graves, and so the advantage there being that the ground penetrating radar is able to identify those actual graves. And what we heard there at the press conference is that by comparison, what they have found, these depressions in the soil look identical to actual graves at the headstones that are there. So it leaves little doubt in their mind that that is what they are dealing with here. This is, we heard at the press conference from elders who survived the Beauval Indian Residential School, as well as their descendants describing what life in the various communities, particularly the English River First Nation in Northwest Saskatchewan, is like as a result of the Beauval Indian Residential School, which operated with government funding since 1897 through to 1983. The emotions were very clear on those who described, a community that in the far north of Saskatchewan that is very much relies on the traditions, the First Nations traditions, the hunting, the fishing passed down by elders, but one that has felt the effects of the residential schools, and those effects being felt, Andrew, we were told, by likely 16 different First Nation and Métis communities that sent children or had children taken and sent to this particular residential school.
And so, Sarah, we heard a little bit about what's next as far as this investigation goes.
Yes, and one of the final answers there was about the potential for exhuming graves, and what we were told is that will be a last resort, that they are going to be continuing to pursue documentation, relying on that documentation in order to try and identify the children that may have been buried there. There is more searching to come. That is based on the sites that they will be searching, based on the stories told by elders who attended that residential school, and the stories of loss and where others may have been buried. There were also calls for both the federal government and the Roman Catholic Church to do a number of things, and sadly these are things that we have heard. They are echoes of previous press conferences announcing other discoveries of likely unmarked graves. Things like make access to documentation easier. We were told that it is still very difficult. They are calling for a monument to commemorate the loss here, as well as sustained support, financial being one form of support that they are calling for in terms of furthering the search and in terms of the healing process. But Chief Jenny Wolverine, right off the top, became emotional, and I want to play you her clip when she talked about the fact that this is not just about money here.
We will be a united front together with First Nations and Métis communities and governments. Together, we will call on Canada and Saskatchewan governments to join with us. It doesn't all come down to dollars and cents.
Andrew, we heard repeatedly that really, what is so important is the acknowledgement of what has happened here, and that there be a room for healing and support in that healing process, and an acknowledgement of the loss that has come, not just in terms of life loss, but also the cultural loss to these communities. And an example of that being Chief Jenny Wolverine herself, who said she's a Dene woman, and she's a proud Dene woman living in a Dene Cree community in northwestern Saskatchewan, but she doesn't have a full understanding of the Dene language. She is not able to speak fluently or understand it fluently because both her grandparents and her parents attended this residential school, and that part of the culture for her was lost.
Sarah, thank you. The CBC's Sarah Galashan. There are emotional and crisis referral services available for anyone affected by the lingering effects of residential schools and by these latest reports. A National Indian Residential School crisis line is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-866-925-4419.